Welcome to another edition of Bygones. Now, if you can imagine I'm a small white terrier, and that I'm looking into the horn of a large gramophone, and that you were around here any time after 1908, you'll probably know that my name is Nippa, and that the firm that I represent is his master's voice. And believe me, there's a fascinating story behind it.
The most famous little white dog of this century still listens to his master's voice high above the company which pioneered the record industry. It was to this building at Hayes in Middlesex that almost every famous recording star once had to come. Today, that same route is taken by Leonard Petts, archivist of the greatest record company in the world. The empty corridors are haunted by the ghosts of performers who were once here. Opera singers, musicians, dance bands, poets and comedians all entered this room to be immortalised on wax.
We could go on loving in the same old way.
Suppose it makes you bet? I don't worry over that.
During the first 25 years of this century, the most famous and important artists, both in this country and from all over Europe, were recorded on a simple acoustic disc cutter, so that now they will last forever. The invention of the recording machine changed the world. Suddenly, unknown performers shot to fame, while the music of those already famous became available to everybody. Huge fortunes were earned by some of the top singing stars. The key to the industry's success was the highly secret recording machine, as Leonard Petts divulges.
Here we have a 1911 acoustic wax recording machine. This would have recorded the sound onto large wax discs similar to this. The wax is placed onto the turntable. The motor is driven by weights so as to give an even speed, and as the recording is made, so the wax moves forward, running continuously into the centre of the record. Neither the artist or even the managing director of the company would normally have access to this machine. The whole process was entirely secret.
All right, Mr. Roby.
All right, I've got to sing into here.
That's the idea.
All right, oh, shan't I look silly?
George Roby, like every other entertainer, knew he'd be a lot sillier not to record.
Now, I've got a saying, it isn't my own. On the back of a bus I first read it. It's a wonderful help to a girl all alone, and it does do the bus people credit. On buses and trams you'll see it displayed. On hoardings and posters you'll meet it. So whatever the danger, you won't be afraid. If only you'll learn to repeat it. Safety first, look before you leap.
By the 1920s, recording one's talent was established as an essential part of showbiz. The technology began in 1878, when Edison patented his phonograph. Then, a rival developed a better way of reproducing sound on a gramophone. In 1898, the Gramophone Company opened its first London office in Maiden Lane. The man who invented it was Emil Berliner, a German who had emigrated to America 25 years earlier. He was the real pioneer of recording. His British licensees had chosen Maiden Lane in Covent Garden as it was conveniently close to many of London's top theatres and music halls, where they hoped to find new talent. Next door was Rule's Restaurant, the haunt of music hall artists. The barmaid, Cyria Lamont, fancied herself as a singer, so she cut the very first record in the new studio. For the next 3 years, the Gramophone Company recorded every act they could find. When they began selling their records and gramophones, they sold out at once. Meanwhile, the company had spread across Europe like a tidal wave. At the same time as opening new offices, a recording engineer, Fred Geisberg, was scouring each new country for its musicians. The talking machine went to places that were so remote white men were unknown. Weird and wonderful music from the rest of the world could now be heard in the front room. By the end of 1902, the whole of Asia and the Far East had been conquered. Back in London in 1907, the Gramophone Company and its American rival Victor made an amazing agreement.
And here it is. The part of the map coloured red was given to the American Victor Company, whilst the rest of the world, which was coloured green, was handed over to the British Gramophone Company. It is surprising how quickly the Gramophone Company spread into Europe. Almost within a few months, it was recording in all of these countries and way into Russia, where the first celebrity records were made.
The rate of growth was so rapid that the company bought 50 acres of farmland at Hayes in Middlesex. The foundation stone was laid by Nellie Melba on the 13th of May 1907. Within 1 year, the first records came off the presses. Beautifully coloured handbills were the company's best means of getting noticed. Their aim was twofold: to make everyone believe that the wealthy upper classes had already accepted the new technology into their homes. And they introduced the gramophone into familiar situations so that it not only became respectable, but it was suggested that gramophone records were indispensable to normal everyday life. Their handbills were distributed all over Europe each month to advertise the latest releases. This simple promotion proved most effective. In the background of many of the pictures, a small white dog appeared. His introduction changed both the company's face and even its name. The friendly terrier was a very real dog called Nippa, but he had already died of old age long before becoming the world's most famous trademark. The dog's portrait had been painted by the artist Francis Barraud. In the original, Nippa was seen staring into the horn, not of a gramophone, but an Edison cylinder phonograph. The picture had been painted before the Gramophone Company opened in London, but it already had the title, His Master's Voice. When Barraud tried to sell it to the Gramophone Company, they insisted that over the old phonograph, he must paint one of their new gramophones. Francis Barraud spent the rest of his life painting copies of the picture for each new office of the company. Nippa was so popular that the Gramophone Company became known in the public mind as His Master's Voice. Thereafter he appeared on countless millions of record labels. HMV produced a huge range of different music, so they distinguished each with a different coloured label. But some of the artists decided that their own performances were so special that they also needed individual colour coding. The most famous and temperamental was Nellie Melba. She insisted that her records must have mauve labels. When she first agreed to record with HMV, the conditions she made were almost impossible. But she was so famous they had to have her. Despite her insistence that each record cost 1 guinea, a fortune in 1904, they sold like hot cakes. But she was only one of the pop stars of the era. Caruso became world famous through his recordings. Sir Henry Wood, founder of the Promenade Concerts, was a great British favourite. The Italian soprano Tetrazzini made money as fast as her young men could spend it. Fyodor Shaliapin, the Russian bass, was one of the first great names to record with the company. Amelita Gallicurci was well known on record before ever she came to Britain, while Harry Lauder had earned his fortune playing in music halls all over the country. On the massive scale that HMV operated, the actual discs were duplicated quite cheaply. Once the sound had been cut into the wax, it was electroplated with copper. When the wax had been stripped away from the master, a new working matrix was formed, from which all the records would be pressed. Under a pressure of 100 tons, sweet music was squeezed into the warm shellac. Within 3 months of opening the Hayes factory, their output was over 30,000 records every month. And still there was no serious competition. For his master's voice, it was as good as printing banknotes. The gramophone literally reached the end of the earth when Captain Scott took one on his last expedition to the South Pole. Though Scott failed to return, his gramophone came back.
And this is the actual gramophone. On the front of the cabinet is the medallion of the Scott expedition. And along the tone arm are a series of indentations which are said to have been made by inquisitive penguins who came along and pecked at the gramophone. It's a nice story, and I suppose it's possibly true. As you can see, the record on the gramophone is contemporary with the machine, and it now features the famous painting of the dog listening to the gramophone.
It was so important to get gramophones into the most old-fashioned and traditional homes that HMV produced a special model called the Melba. It was named after their best-selling performer because, as everyone knew, the great soprano would only accept the highest standards of good taste. It could hardly fail to sell. But there were plenty of others whose interest was not looks, but volume.
This monster dates from 1927 and represents the absolute zenith of the development of the acoustic gramophone. And the sound is really quite remarkable for its period.
The gramophone without its curving horn gave the sophisticated buyer the impression that he was getting something very modern. In reality, acoustic players were still very primitive. But as sales rose, plans were drawn up to enlarge the factory at Hayes. When first opened, the site was deep in the countryside, but with a good railway link to supply the outside world. As time passed, London's suburbs expanded, so there was never any shortage of labour. Thousands and thousands of people were employed here, mass-producing the gramophones and records that would fill every room in the country with music. Skilled trades and crafts were brought together to construct machines that would look like furniture. Designers worked to produce gramophones which would be in keeping with any decor, yet inevitably they created their own fashion. During the 1920s and 30s, the sale of opera was overtaken by new forms of popular music: jazz, swing bands and the crooners. In 1933, Gracie Fields visited Hayes to press her 4 millionth disc, Looking on the Bright Side.
On the bright side of the road, in the shade, thinking of the chest, hoping for the best, looking on the bright side of life. I'm waiting on the right side, and if luck comes to my way, giving me a break, I shall be awake, looking on the bright side of life. Today I'm in the shadow, like tomorrow my way. Like clouds will lift and lift, this sunshine over to me. I'm looking.
But his master's voice was more than a successful business enterprise. It pioneered the science of sound. It gave the world instant music. It had recorded and made history. The archives of the firm bulge with all the paperwork of the first 70 years of trading. Not mere financial accounts, but detailed records of every avenue they explored, every artist they approached. At the voice trial of a new young singer on the 11th of August 1925, the recordist noted that Mr. Noel Coward's voice was too weak. You can't always be right. This silver-plated microphone was made for King George V. After he and Queen Mary had given their first message to the children of the Empire in 1923, the royal family made a succession of recordings catalogued under the heading The Royal Records. 2 copies of each were signed and bound in the finest leather. The king kept one and the company the other. HMV knew the value of obliging the royal family. They even made a miniature gramophone and record of the national anthem for the Royal Doll's House at Windsor Castle. And for those who liked their records well scratched, HMV introduced an automatic record changer. The whole record empire was controlled by a handful of men on the board. For over 40 years, Alfred Clark was the strong man in London. His was the master's voice that all obeyed. The most important breakthrough in sound recording technology came in 1925, when the first electrical recording process was used by the company. For 30 years, the range of acoustic recording machines had been very limited. Now singers no longer had to bellow into a tin horn. At last, the full beauty of Gilli's voice could be captured. The backroom boffins at HMV were equipped with the very latest gadgetry. Now they could doctor their original acoustic recordings of earlier stars. Caruso had died in 1921, yet his voice was brought back to life, complete with new orchestration. The company was very proud of this achievement and set about promoting the sales of both the re-recorded opera singer and their new electric gramophone.
Well, that will give you a very good idea of how Caruso's voice sounded to his own ears 27 years ago, and played on an instrument which, incidentally, belonged to himself.
What they did was play the original record and a new orchestra accompaniment at the same time. During the gaps in the singing, the full effect of the accompaniment was grafted on.
Listen to this record.
What date's this, Len?
Oh, 1900, I think.
1900, so the speed could be anything. But let's start it at 78 anyway, shall we?
Yes.
Let's see how it sounds.
Today, sound technician Keith Hardwick continues the mammoth task of making new records from old.
No, that's wrong. Fast, I think.
Oh, yes, it's fast. I think these are being the baritone.
Yes, I'll take it down to 74. Yes, let's get rid of some of that surface noise.
Back in the Depression, when times were hard for the recording companies, his master's voice merged with its rival Columbia to form Electric and Musical Industries Limited, better known as EMI. Since then, the main developments have been in electronic technology. Music recorded acoustically 70 years ago is now transferred onto magnetic tape. Every tiny imperfection can be heard. The tape stopped, and the click surgically removed. Once rejoined, no one would ever know that it had been tampered with. The sales of these golden oldies have proved that this time-consuming effort is worth all the trouble. In the vaults are thousands more classics waiting to be cleaned and polished for serious music collectors. All this work now happens in London at the studios which EMI have used since 1931, but which were unknown outside the industry until these chaps came along. Thanks to the Beatles and their record named after the street, Abbey Road has become the most famous recording studio in the world. Beatle fans the world over come here just to steal the road sign. But the studios have been used for recording classical music right from the start, when the electric microphone first liberated the artist from the acoustic recording machines, so that the sound of a complete orchestra could be heard properly. EMI spent £100,000 equipping the first ever custom-built recording studio. It was then the biggest in the world, and still remains the best. It was officially declared open on the 12th of November 1931. Instead of a ribbon-cutting ceremony, Sir Edward Elgar conducted the London Symphony Orchestra, recording his own Falstaff suite.
Very nice program this morning.
As a boy, Yehudi Menuhin recorded here with Elgar. 50 years later, Yehudi introduced the prodigious violinist Jin Lai. What are his memories of the early days?
Oh, very warm ones. The orchestra at that time was on the opposite side of the room. And of course, this room has gone through any number of transformations. Each time there was a new fashion or a new development. This room was where it was tried out. It's extraordinary that he's starting at the most advanced level, whereas I've worked up to it, as it were.
A huge party of stars celebrated the studio's 50th birthday. Nippa would have enjoyed the cake, had anyone known where to find him. When he died of old age in 1895, he had been buried under a mulberry tree in a garden in Kingston-on-Thames. In 1950, his master's voice decided it was time to find him. They found the site of the garden. There was the stump of the tree. So they started digging. Surrounded by journalists, the workmen dug and dug and dug, until eventually they unearthed a pitiful handful of bones. The Royal College of Veterinaries declared that they belonged to a sheep. Nippa had vanished. Of course, as everyone knows, he's alive and well, living on countless millions of records. Deep in a bomb-proof vault, EMI guards their priceless accumulation of every original record that they have made, from Emil Berliner's zinc-etched discs of 1898 to today's rock groups. The world's finest collection of man's musical creativity, preserved forever.
Having collected bygones for the best part of half a century, I obviously spent a lot of my time at sales. Some are upmarket and right out of my price range, but very interesting. And others are down market and often very sad. Most of them mark the end of an era, and there is invariably a story of events leading up to the gavel. Sometimes it's a sale because a family's run out of time. Sometimes it's a sale of convenience where shortage of funds leave no alternative. And sometimes because a family no longer need the items on offer or has run out of people to use them. Seldom can there have been a sale like the one held at Elvedon Hall in the heart of East Anglia. So let's go for a day at the auction.
In the middle of Suffolk's flat heathland between Newmarket and Thetford sits Elvedon Hall, one of the most eccentric country houses in Britain. For the past 40 years, the doors and windows of this relic of Edwardian glory have been firmly bolted and shuttered. Inside, nothing has changed. At the centre of the house, a dazzling marble hall still evokes the majesty of our lost empire. Like the fairy tale princess, Elvedon Hall has been in a deep sleep. Over the years, this has been home to various owners, but of them all the most extraordinary figure was a deposed Indian prince, the Maharaja Dulip Singh. When unseated by the British from his Punjab throne, this handsome and exotic young Sikh came to live in England as Queen Victoria's favourite. Enshrined within the fabric of the house is a hint of the Maharaja's curious existence. But it's the possessions of the succeeding family which make this house so special. Since Elvedon Hall was last furnished and fitted in Edwardian times, the contents have not been altered. Suddenly, the owner decided to sell it all. Lock, stock and coal scuttles. May the 17th, 1984. At 10 a.m, the front doors of Elvedon Hall were flung open. In the fairy story, a handsome prince awakened his slumbering princess with a gentle kiss. In reality, the whole wide world came barging in with a wild roar.
How much is it for the whole lot?
Well, 35.
Which are you most interested in, furniture or the pictures or the
Not
carpet?
pictures, or the carpets, do you like?
The tapestries are lovely.
Entry was bought with a catalogue, £35 for a boxed set. It had taken Christie's the auctioneers 4 months to set up this sale. Viewing day was a cash crop. The majority were here out of curiosity, a chance to peep into the grandeur of another age. Then there were the dealers, both locals and Londoners, and, most significant, international collectors of fine art, the very wealthiest of all. People flowed through the private rooms of the house, absorbing the atmosphere while it lasted. Unseen by the throng sat the man who made this event possible, Lord Iver, the owner of everything here. In the cedar room reclined his great-grandmother, Adelaide Maria, Countess of Iver, for whom the house was originally furnished. She preferred to gaze not at the present, but into the past. Elvedon Hall was first built in the 1770s by an admiral, Lord Keppel. Nearly a century later, the Maharaja Dulip Singh largely rebuilt it, in his native style, to remind him of home. In 1899, work began to double its size. It had been bought by the Earl of Iver, grandson of the founder of the Guinness Brewery. As there was no shortage of cash in the kitty, he decided to make his mark. The marble hall was Lord Iver's idea and had nothing to do with the late Maharaja. Elvedon became a typical rich man's country estate. It was also Mecca for high society. The Ivers were immensely wealthy. They courted royal patronage. King Edward VII became a regular shooting guest. Life at Elvedon Hall was typical of the grand style in which the uppermost class lived. Shooting counted above all. During the 1930s, the second Lord Iver lived at Elvedon as an enterprising farmer. But after the last war, he decided not to return, and it was closed up. And so it remained for 40 years, until the present Earl of Iver decided it was time to reopen it. Not to live here, but to get rid of the contents. As chairman of the Guinness Brewing Empire, an important figure in Ireland, he could never imagine living here.
With any option open to me, I am not contemplating a sale.
He was brought up in Dublin, so he had no sentimental attachment to Elvedon, nor did he know what treasures were in store.
I was quite astonished to read the proofs of the catalogues, because, of course, many of the items had been, for example, the books had been stacked in bookcases behind each other, and I didn't half know what was there. Saturday was the first time I actually saw the house with the furniture laid out, because it was under wraps virtually before I was born.
When the wraps were removed, an Aladdin's cave was revealed. Everything was in perfect condition. After months of discovery and sorting, 3,297 lots were prepared for auction, divided into 6 categories. First, there was silver. Then books, a fine selection of local history sprinkled with rare oddities. A wonderful selection of English and continental ceramics, mixed with some fabulous Oriental porcelain, estimated value up to £100,000. Careful, madam. Top prices were expected for the carpets, textiles and tapestries. But the bulk of the sale was furniture. What had once filled over 100 rooms would take 4 days to dispose of. Judging by the number of antique experts present, the prospects for the sale began to look interesting. Though Christie's chaps are normally discreet, the Honourable Charles Alsop was bubbling over.
It's aroused greater interest in any sale that we've ever done. We usually play a little game. We count the cars in the car park at various given times of the day. And at 1 o'clock yesterday there were 1,400 cars in the car park, which I think the average is something like 2.5 people per car, which gives us over 3,000 people here yesterday, which is a record by over 1,000.
Every last piece from the house had to go. A huge marquee was filled with lesser valuables, classy mementos. But everyone wondered what use the house would have once stripped bare.
What I thought was, let's get rid of all the furniture, let me have a walk around, assess, see what the place looks like, see whether we could convert it or... my mind is in fact completely open, but I thought the first stage was get rid of the furniture and let the hare see the rabbit.
After 3 days of non-stop viewing, everyone, hares and rabbits included, was thrown out, while all the lots were reorganised into neat numbered rows. Tapestries were stripped from their frames and the carpets rolled up. All that Edwardian splendour suddenly looked like so much bric-a-brac. The mats slouched against the wall, like soldiers waiting to go over the top. It was the lull before the storm. Christie's estimated that the total sale might fetch £2.5 million when the chairman began with the pictures.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the sale here at Elvedon.
The atmosphere was of hopeful anticipation. Would the catalogue estimates be right? If so, this painting of Greenwich should go for around £20,000.
For 500, 6,000, 500, 6,500 pounds, 7,500, 8,500, 9,000 for £9,000. 500. £9,500. Another one? It's your bid at £9,500. For £9,500. Any more? 9,500. Number 240.
Some of the audience had come just to acquire the Maharaja, reckoned to go for as little as 3,000. But what is a copy of the original painting of a deposed king of Bengal really worth?
£7,000, 500, 8,000, 500, 9,000. Your bid at 9. Your bid hit 500, 10,000. Another one's at £10,000. Against you, 11,000, 12,000. For £12,000. It's against you all in front of me for £12,000. The bid is beside 13,000, 14,000, £14,000. For £14,000. For £14,000. Any more? 14,000.
Obviously, far more than anyone had thought, by somebody who'd made his bid in advance and left it with Charles Alsop. The sale was clearly warming up very quickly. So how would Granny Ivor fare? She was valued at around 40,000.
£20,000 offered for £20,000. For £20,000. 22,000, 25,000, 28,000, 30,000, 35,000, 40,000, 45,000, 50,000, 55,000, 60,000, 65,000, 70,000, 75,000 against you now, 80,000, 85,000, 90,000, 95,000, 100,000, 110,000, 120,000, for £120,000. For £120,000. Any more? 120,000. Oh, you said 229.
In the Marble Hall, the books were being sold.
For 250.
The prize exhibit was the magnificent monograph of pheasants, a memory of the tens of thousands killed at Elvedon by gentlemen.
420, 450. Against you on the sofa. I've got that. 480, 550 at the desk at £550. Any more? 650, 700, 850, £850, 950, £1,000, 1,100, £1,100 at the back at £1,100. Any more for £1,100?
Now there are 16 chairs in the lot.
Furniture was going at a jogging pace in the Green Marquee. Lot 436 was a fine set of Irish mid-Georgian mahogany dining chairs.
14,000.
When the house was first entered by Christie's, a pair were found together. Then, two more in another room. They were recognised as being quite good. As the house was searched, more and more appeared, until the full set of 16 were found, all in prime condition.
52,000.
I must say, they would look quite nice in my kitchen.
54,000. 56,000. £56,000. At £56,000. £56,000. 229.
And to go with the chairs, how about a George III Ormolu-mounted oval wine cooler? No home should be without one. That nice Mr. Alsop will do his best to sell it for a reasonable figure in his own inimitable manner.
£500, 9,000, lots of places, 10,000, 11,000, 12,000, 13,000, 14,000, 14,000 bids in front now at £14,000, 15,000, 16,000, 17,000. For you, 17,500. One more, 18,000, 19,000, 20,000, 21,000, 22,000, £22,000. £22,000. Any more? 23,000. One more. Gone this way. 23,000. Gentleman on the left. At £23,000. Any more? 23,000. Last time. For you, sir.
That's what you call pretty cool.
22,000, 24,000, 26,000, 28,000, 30,000, 32,000.
The first Lord Iver had a weakness for collecting tapestries. He brought them all over Europe. To the specialist, these ones are highly significant. Though hardly fashionable today, we watch TV instead, they are quite magnificent. This scene of infant gardeners tidying up for the winter is one of 3 Louis XIV Gobelin tapestries.
One more, for £40,000. Any more? 40,000. For you, sir.
Halfway through, and over £4 million spent so far. Thirsty work. Hampers and shampers all round. So seldom does a complete stately home come under the hammer that dealers had flown in from the United States for a bit of old England. They were not going home empty-handed. But there was an opportunity for more humble buyers to get their mementos too. At the start of the China sale, prices stayed within 3 figures. The bargain basement by comparison. The last relic of the man who originally built Elvedon, Admiral Keppel, seemed somehow to have been overlooked by the big boys. How appropriate that Norwich Castle Museum were able to acquire it.
150 on the left at £150, 160, 170 at £170. Your bid, 180 against Chanel, 190 at 190, 220 against you on the right at £220. Any more for 220?
Organising a sale of this magnitude is no mean feat. Cunning strategy up front is matched by military precision backstage to keep things flowing. The whole exercise is not unlike a travelling theatre. But auctioneers have also been described as more like undertakers. Though quite out of keeping with the rest of the house, the fittings and furniture of the silver bedroom were to be sold in one lot. This room was designed for the second Countess of Iver by Betty Joel in 1930. Highly collectible today, you'd think. But being of such a different period from everything else, the whole lot went for a snip.
Now I have £1,500 off for them. 1,500, 1,600, 1,700, £1,700, 1,700, 1,800, £1,800, 1,900, £1,900, 1,900, £2,000, 2,000. At 2,000, 2,200, 2,400, 2,600, 2,800, 3,000, 3,200, 3,500, 3,800, 4,000, 4,200, 4,500 on the right, £4,500. At £4,500. Any more? At £4,500.
An auctioneer's motto should be bid now, pay later. Christie's cash and carry is highly sophisticated. This hardware ensures that the buyer's premium of 8% is included. The seller will also be paying his commission of 10% later on. Oh, plus VAT, of course.
1,300, 1,400.
At each section of the sale, the audience of bidders is slightly different. All kinds of folk go to auctions, and the experienced auctioneer knows how to get the most out of them.
How much for this? 400 for it. 450, 550, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000.
Of course, sometimes there are people in the audience who've come incognito and don't wish to be identified.
1,400.
But Charlie Alsop would never let on.
1,600.
Going to the right person is a Swedish silver bridal crown.
1,900, 2,000, 2,100, 4,000, £4,000. At £4,000 any more, £4,000. All done, 4,000? Very appropriate. 1147.
The last bird of the silver season, an armoured pheasant who survived the guns, now falls to the hammer.
700, £800 off at 800, 900, 900, 1,000, 1,100, 1,200, 1,300, 1,400, 1,500, 1,500, 1,600 on the right, 1,600. At 1,600, 1,700, lost the places, 1,800, £1,800, still on the right at 8, you bidding? 1,800 then, on the right at £1,800, 1,900, £1,900, 1,900, 2,000, £2,000, £2,000, £2,000 now, at £2,000, At £2,000 anymore, 2,000. £200, 220.
Of all categories of treasure at Elvedon, it was the carpets which aroused the greatest excitement. The world's top dealers were here. Over 250 assorted rugs and carpets were waiting to come out into the open. Most were in immaculate condition, just as when Lord Iver bought them at the end of the last century. Every detail of their history was known, with their original price tags still attached. Even Christie's were taken by surprise when bids soared up to 20 times their estimated value. Talk about magic carpets.
I have £2,000 off this one, 2,000, 2,200, 2,400, £2,400, 2,400, 2,600, 2,600 bid on my right. 4,200, 4,500, 4,800, 5,000, 5,200, 5,500, 5,800, £5,800, £5,800, all down at 5,800. For you, sir. 741. Don't think you have to stop. Lot 1941. Showing on the left here. I still have 400 for this, 400 offered. 400, 420, 420 pounds, 420, 450, 450, 480, 550, 650, 750, 800, and 50, 850, 850 pounds, 900 in two places.
During the next 3 hours, £1 million worth of woven sheep's wool changed hands. One man spent £200,000. I do hope he got what he wanted.
At £1,100, any more 1,100. You all down at 1,100? Anthony?
Lot number 1,218, the first of the coal scuttles, lot 1,218, £100 are offered at £100, and 10, 20, 130, 140, 150, 160, 170, 180, 190, 200, at £200 and 20, gauge in the centre at 220, 250.
The last afternoon was reserved for the tail-end bits and pieces, the practical paraphernalia of any smart Edwardian mansion, the padding to the artworks, which made Elvedon unique. There were 105 rooms in use in the house. All the bedrooms and living rooms had fires for maximum comfort. Each had its own numbered brass coal scuttle, and a maid to carry it. The maids are not for sale. Still, there should have been enough scuttles to go round. But money fever was highly infectious during that week in May.
On the left note, £320. Any more? At £320. Any more? For
the sale was clearly a great success. Robin Hood had redistributed the treasure, but with the contents went all the ghosts, Keppel, the Maharaja, and the Edwardian Ivors. The time capsule was broken and can never be mended.
220, going to sir at 220, 250, 280, 320, 350, last chance, £500. Any more? 650. Any more? It's almost expensive as a silver. £650. Any more? £650. Any more for 650?
Lot 1660.
As the last of the 3,297 lots appeared, Christie's cool reserve thawed. They could relax now.
200 for them, 250, 350, 400.
Elvedon was empty. Their work was done.
50, 650, 750, 850.
The total was £5,706,222.
£1,000, any more? £1,200 at £1,200, any more? £1,200, any more? 1,200. All down at 1,200. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed it all as much as we have. That concludes the sale.
think everybody must feel a tinge of sadness, but I think everybody has to be realistic today, and I think my decision was realistic, and I think it's taken in that spirit.
Each year, towards the end of the summer, a rather unusual fete takes place behind the Buck Public House at Flixton. All the usual stalls are there, of course, and a number of unusual ones as well. 3 hours of hectic activity and fundraising goes on against a background of historic aircraft. For this is the annual fete of the Norfolk and Suffolk Aviation Museum. Near neighbours, a free-fall parachute club based at the disused World War II airfield usually drop in to add to the spectacle and give the funds a boost. But it's during autumn and winter that the serious work goes on.
Right, we've got Reps Church to our left there, and we've got Woods' Boatyard straight ahead. And according to my map, that would bring us on a line like that. Now, if we put that with the eyewitness account...
Well, this is the eyewitness account, isn't it? The main road, the bridge, Loddermere Field, and this site. So we got the direction of flight.
We have the direction.
A small group from the Norfolk and Suffolk Aviation Museum have obtained permission to investigate the site near Potter Heigham, where an RAF Typhoon crashed during the war. The search is carried out methodically. Solid objects located by probing, and then eagerly unearthed. Even though the map reference of a crash site is known, the modern metal detector can enable the aviation archaeologist to pinpoint the exact position of pieces of wreckage.
Yeah, I think there is something. There's another round of cannon shells all run.
There's a bit glass.
Perspex. There we are.
Even the most insignificant pieces are closely examined as the diggers try to identify them. In any dig, local knowledge and information can be invaluable, whether it is first or second hand.
He said it came over this spot, did a complete circle round, and the two of them together, the front one lifted and went over the mill, and the second one caught it.
The other eyewitness, he disproved that, but because we've got to try and get...
Yes, but the thing that makes me think that it might be true is the fact that they got the heavy engine, or part of the heavy engine, out of the dyke, which is in line between where we are now and the mill.
Although the finds from this particular dig, a few bits from the canopy, some 20mm cannon shells, and the end plate from the ammunition magazine are perhaps not all that impressive, they will be recorded and become another exhibit in the museum.
Yeah, there's something here. All torn right through here.
On a bitterly cold November day, the saltings at Stiffkey on the North Norfolk coast are not a pleasant location. Yet an enthusiastic excavation team are working with a will. Their aim is to recover the remains of a small radio-controlled aircraft that was used as a target for anti-aircraft gunners.
They dug down and taken...
When you're working in these cold, wet and muddy conditions, it really does become a team effort.
Slowly, slowly.
Here was the engine unit, almost in one piece, though the cylinders had probably broken off on impact. Often it is during a dig that an eyewitness will volunteer information on other crash sites.
Yes, early one morning there was a Wellington come in from Germany and it crashed in the top of them trees, just over there. Can you see what I mean?
Where the gap is now?
Yes, right, yeah. But you weren't allowed anywhere near, but they put guards on them, you see.
Yes,
So you couldn't see what happened, really.
When salvaging wreckage, safety is a very important consideration, and heavy pieces are usually manipulated from above using ropes.
You got some waistcoat work as well.
In spite of the unfavourable conditions, the dig was quite rewarding, and the best part of 2 power units from these unusual aircraft were recovered.
That'll do you.
Yeah.
They were 4-cylinder, horizontally opposed air-cooled engines, and the aircraft were approximately 12 feet long with a 16-foot wingspan. An interesting historical, not technical fact, is that fitting the propellers on the assembly line in Los Angeles, California in 1945 was a pretty girl who attracted the attention of a photographer. She was later to become world famous as Marilyn Monroe. Housed in limited accommodation on the B-1062 between Bungay and Harleston, the museum has attracted thousands of visitors since 1974. One room is devoted entirely to material relating to the US 8th Air Force. The whole collection, with its detailed information, gives a remarkable insight into the history of aviation, to which new finds of old relics are continually being added.
The dig can't take place unless permission has been obtained from the Ministry of Defence in the first place, because although after all these years these parts wouldn't seem to be owned by anybody, the Ministry of Defence do actually lay claim to any parts of British and Allied aircraft, and even German, although it doesn't really apply to the V1s and V2s. One of the more interesting sites was a Spitfire we were able to dig up at Claxton, near Loddon, and from that crash site we managed to get many interesting items, including parts of the engine, although we never actually did find the engine itself, trimming tabs, and even a part of the smashed wooden propeller which had still remained after all these years. One of the best preserved pieces that we've found has been, in fact, the undercarriage leg and the tyre, which I haven't got here, but the undercarriage leg is in remarkably good condition and even has the spat attached just as it was at the time.
Although the original concept was to preserve material from the Second World War only, members of the Society soon felt that if possible, World War I items should also be included.
The only collection that we did have was 2 Sopwith Camel propellers that one of our members had managed to buy from a local antique shop, and we decided to try and build this up to something representing aerial warfare in the First World War. The World War II room, things were comparatively easy to collect. Farmers told us of sites where aircraft had crashed. Also, people came into the museum with items they'd collected from the actual crash at the time. The World War I was a different kettle of fish altogether. We found that instead of digging into the ground, we had to dig into people's memories and also into their attics.
Gradually, numerous items relating to the early days of the Royal Flying Corps and Royal Naval Air Service were found, and many people generously donated their own personal collections of souvenirs. The ways in which items come to hand are many and varied, and at times quite remarkable. This rear gun turret is believed to be from a Manchester aircraft and was part of an exchange with another museum. But one day it was learned that a turret had been seen lying in an orchard. So at the end of a long, hard day excavating, a small group making a detour on their way home called at a market garden near Ludham. On investigation, they found that the turret was from an Anson. This aircraft, designed around 1936, was the first to incorporate a retractable undercarriage and a rear gun turret. Now, the museum already possessed an Anson, and work was going on to restore it, but it had no turret. Apparently, it was one of a number that had been used as cloches for growing tomatoes. The owner agreed to part with this lone survivor, which by now had lost all its perspex and was derelict. It was retrieved and taken to Flixton, where it now plays a much more realistic role. But as the museum has grown, so have the projects undertaken by members of the Society. And a few years ago, they mobilized all their resources and ingenuity to take advantage of an offer that came out of the blue. A number of F-100 Super Sabre aircraft, which had become surplus to requirement in the French Air Force, had been brought back to a Norfolk airfield and were to be disposed of. And together with groups from the North East and South Wales, they set to work.
The options that the United States government had with these aircraft, since they are essentially obsolete, were either to scrap them or, as we are doing with several of them, turn them over to aviation museums here in the United Kingdom. This was a new idea and one which we were successful in getting the agreement of Her Majesty's government to pursue. And we are very happy that we are able to do so to preserve some of these aircraft in museums in the United Kingdom rather than having them go to the scrap heap.
The aircraft were handed over complete, the only proviso being that all armament must be removed first, and the museum would be responsible for all the work involved in dismantling the aircraft and then transporting it from the US Air Base at Sculthorpe in North Norfolk to Flixton.
He's bitching about that, and he said it'll be okay. Clear it and come up here. You're not here.
You're gonna load it up Saturday morning, right?
Yeah. You hope to.
Well, what I can do is, if you just let me know in advance, I can clear it.
With their working party on the site and the main project nearing completion, a T-33 jet trainer was also dismantled under a similar arrangement to add to their exhibits. By the time the Super Sabre was on the way to its new home, there were not only vast sighs of relief, but a considerable feeling of satisfaction.
The planes themselves, when we strip them down at the various airfields, can take anything up to 2 or 3 days. In fact, we find that the best thing to do is to take a holiday, a large holiday, in other words, 5 to 10 or even up to a dozen people, if they can work the holiday in, to move up to the airfield and actually live there. This is what we've done on previous occasions, and this is what we like to do. It's a longer job to take them to pieces than it is to put them back together. When we do get them back here, we can usually manage to get all the main parts, such as the wings, tails, undercarriage, and everything back in, we'll say, a matter of hours. But afterwards, we still have to fit all the small details in.
Now on their home ground, those members of the Society who'd not been able to travel to Sculthorpe and spend time away were able to join in and to help with the reconstruction. With most of this work taking place at weekends, it enables more people to take part, and it really does become a team effort.
Who's got the bolts in? Have you got a hammer?
And so this F-100 Super Sabre, built at Inglewood, Los Angeles, California, and having served in Europe with the French Air Force, finds a last resting place here in Suffolk. On the evening of the 28th of August 1942, a Dornier 217 took off from Germany to attack targets in Britain. It had crossed the North Sea and was over East Anglia and heading towards Birmingham. Just before 11 p.m, a Mosquito night fighter, which had taken off from Castle Camps in Cambridgeshire, intercepted it. And it was shot down. On the 18th of October 1982, as soon as the sugar beet crop had been harvested, an excavation team, duly authorized by the Ministry of Defence and with the full cooperation of the landowner, had pinpointed the spot. Research is the all-important aspect of excavating crash sites, and by the time the group arrive, they are already in possession of all the facts that their historians have gained from the official records.
We understand the plane came down in a steep dive and left quite a crater. Initially, we contacted several local people who witnessed the actual event, and the general consensus of opinion from them was that although the wreckage on the surface had been recovered at the time, there was still a good possibility that some remained buried. In addition, my research revealed that this aircraft had in fact jettisoned its bomb load and that the crew had all bailed out, so that we knew, in fact, before we came here, that there was no chance of encountering either explosive ordnance or human remains in the wreckage.
Piloting the Dornier was Oberleutnant Hans Wolf. And piloting the Mosquito was Wing Commander, later to become Group Captain, Gordon Slade, who, after the war, was Senior Test Pilot at Fairey Aviation and died in 1981. As the report indicated that the aircraft came down from a considerable height in a steep dive, a mechanical digger has been hired, an expense which has to be met from museum funds. Often, as a dig proceeds, water becomes an increasing problem. As more and more pieces are found and identified, photographs are taken, which will eventually become part of the subsequent records. Not surprisingly, in this agricultural area, old fertilizer bags are used to collect and transport the finds. And with both farmers and farm workers among the group, great attention is paid to reinstating the land properly after the excavations.
Front or the back? Which is the front or the back? This is the back, yeah.
Among the articles found was a small package containing an emergency medical kit. After nearly 40 years buried beneath the ground, it is cleaned and restored to something like its original condition, to be displayed along with the remainder of a flare pistol and manufacturer's identification plates from various components, including the engines.
That's it.
The reduction gearing from one of the engines has surprisingly, since it was at the front of the heaviest part and therefore buried to a depth of about 14 feet, remained in remarkably good condition.
John Joe Robert. Yeah. Push your bearing round. Tell me hold it here.
Back in the farm workshop of Terry Spruce, he and John Rowe begin the time-consuming task of putting the larger mechanical items back into the sort of condition in which they can be displayed. It's not unusual for jobs such as these to monopolize all their spare time for several weeks on end. and wives are quite likely to be in danger of becoming museum widows.
That's it. It should come on.
The Dornier 217 was equipped with two BMW engines developing 1,580 brake horsepower and was a 14-cylinder twin-row radial. Although this engine is incomplete, it's amazing what refurbishing can be carried out. Terry and John take great pride in putting it back into a state in which it will make an impressive exhibit in the museum. By the end of 1940, Wellington bombers taking off singly at dusk to raid targets in France and in Germany at night had become a familiar sight to the people of Norfolk and Suffolk. But in 1939, during the first 2 or 3 months of the war, they would take off and fly in formation on daylight raids, often suffering heavy losses. In October 1939, as aircraft of No. 9 Squadron were taking off from Honington, the aircraft nearest the camera and one other collided and crashed in marshy ground in the village of Sappiston, on the edge of the airfield. Now, on a bitterly cold Sunday morning in November 1983, an excavation team is searching for the remains of that aircraft. During the intervening years, what were seedlings, or at most saplings, have grown into substantial willow trees on top of the wreckage. One engine nacelle is located and brought to the surface. Hopes were high that we might find the engine itself. Eventually, a propeller was discovered peeping out from under the roots of quite a large tree. Gradually, as it was eased out, one could see it was attached to its Bristol Pegasus engine, which appeared to be complete. Just reward indeed for those who had braved sleet and snow for most of the day. When restored, together with the two engine nacelles, the main spar and other parts of the airframe, it should make an important exhibit in the museum. But perhaps the most unusual way of adding to the collection occurred in May 1983. A Vickers Valletta had been dismantled at Norwich Airport. And although the wings and engines could be taken to Flixton by road, there was no way that the fuselage could be transported. Here, the RAF stepped in. And as an exercise in transporting aircraft, they brought in a large twin-rotor Chinook helicopter to lift it. The Valletta belongs to the Norwich Air Scouts, but as it was parked within the confines of Norwich Airport, access for the Scouts had become increasingly difficult, and they needed a new home. And so, through the courtesy and cooperation of the Royal Air Force, the Scouts can now make use of their aircraft, and the museum has gained a unique acquisition to add to their growing display.
folks, to see this show, the local show presented by local people.
The show you read about.
Hurry, 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 folks. The local show, the family show.
All the fun of the fair and entertainments galore, just like our grandmums and granddads knew. There was a time when scores of fairs regularly travelled around the countryside. Their arrival was the highlight of the year for country people, but like so many things that they took for granted, the old-time fairs have all but gone. Except, that is, when nostalgically recreated by enthusiasts. That was just a small part of one of the films contained in these film boxes in the archives of Anglia Television. During the last 19 or 20 years, we've shot over 1 million feet of film a year. We've used something like 30 million feet of film since we've started. These boxes are full of the most fascinating stories. So let's have a look at just some of them. Anglia Television started about 20 years ago in the old agricultural hall in the centre of Norwich. They filled this old building with all the latest sophisticated equipment, and the original staff came from all over the country. But not me. I was born here, and I've been here, man and boy, in and around the old place for as long as I can remember. It was all very new to me, too.
Well, I'm going along the road. I don't know exactly where to stop. In fact, I know how to get them past some places. They feed them with bread and sugar lumps. You get all sorts. Currant loaf.
The real beginning of Bygones was the film of John Bone. He was a well-known character on the North Norfolk coast.
Lots of people think this cart has been a hen's house or some of that sort, but the car I made up myself. The only trouble I can't mend is wheels. I have to sort of buy them when I get hold of them. That's the trouble. But come ye back when spring is in the meadow.
Any event which recalls the past was filmed for the future. This open day at Rainham Hall turned into a headache when 20,000 people turned up. I suppose the fact that I happened to mention it the night before on my programme might just have had something to do with it. Anyway, it proved that people liked looking at old things. The old engine drivers knew a trick or two. Herbert cooked our bloaters in the firebox of the engine. They were delicious. Shrimp Davis still continues the old Cromer tradition of tap dancing in the pub, even though he has become a national hero after his long service with the lifeboats. After 29 years as cox of the Cromer lifeboat, he was awarded the British Empire Medal. When the English trader went down in 1941, Shrimp was at the rescue with the famous coxswain Henry Blogg.
Well, we were laying there waiting and watching this ship being smashed to pieces, and we certainly thought we were going to lose the crew aboard of her, 44 chaps. We pleaded with them to have a go, and no, slack water, he said, would be the best time. Slack water would have been somewhere about 4. But this ship was getting such a hiding that we eventually persuaded him, against his better judgment, to have a go. I can tell you the time, 2:25 We got to within, what, a quarter of a mile of her again. One of the biggest sea I've ever seen in my life. Came up on our port side, hit us, and the next thing, I knew we were in the water.
We guessed there was something wrong. And in the evening, about 6 o'clock, we got a phone message to say send dry clothes and some relief crew. They were coming into Yarmouth. And Well, then we learnt that they'd all been washed overboard. And when Shrimp's clothes came back wet, his watch had stopped at 2:30, exact time that I felt as if I was choking and run out the house. You know, knew there was something really wrong.
Rescue of a different sort comes from the Salvation Army. The band of the Lavenham Citadel featured in our story of Gypsy Knights, a man who saved many lost souls in the tradition encouraged by the founder of the army, General Booth. This old and shaky film was taken on one of his conversion tours, probably somewhere in East Anglia.
Put your trust in God, throw your arms round the perishing, and swim until by and by, when the kindly hand of death lands you on the golden shore, the spirits whom you have saved shall bear you away on their snowy wings to the feet of your Lord. Fire a volley.
The army still marches today, but against a less aggressive enemy. At one time, the threat of physical violence was always present. The ladies' ribbon bonnets were worn not for their beauty, but as helmets against regular drunken assaults. The original bonnets were hand-stitched coils of straw, which were then dipped in thick glue, making them hard enough to withstand even bricks and bottles. We just filmed the old process in time because today, although they look the same, the helmets are pressed from plastic molds. We haven't been restricted to East Anglia in our search for stories of declining industries. We went to Aberystwyth in Wales to a wool weaving mill. Although the business was established in 1809, their water-powered yarn spinner, known as a mule, has been running since 1795. Wales seems full of recently revived crafts, though many have never died. Mrs. Horsfield not only grinds her own flour, but even dresses her millstones by hand. Many local railways have disappeared into the mists of time. The fruit and vegetable farmers between Wisbech and Upwell used to use the growers' special every day to get their produce to the city markets. It didn't seem unusual that it ran unfenced beside the road, and with a top speed of 12 miles an hour, it all seemed safe enough. What a pity this picturesque way of doing things had to come to a halt. On one occasion, Bygones crossed the Atlantic to Williamsburg in the USA, where the whole town is a museum in itself. There wasn't a motor vehicle, a telephone, or an electric light wire to be seen, and they locked me up.
Come on. That's you up.
Back home, we visited a rag and bone man in Norwich. You wouldn't recognize him, but how about the new reporter we were trying out? Bob Wellings was his name, and he showed great promise. I think he'll make a go of it in television, even if he did leave this fine city of Norwich for the bright lights.
The sea looks a bit dodgy, doesn't it?
Yes, it is. I've been like a good many years. I don't, well, I know it'll see me out.
It'll see you out, will it? Yeah. It's good for a few more years.
Yeah.
Mind you don't that book.
Oh, right.
Because if you don't, I'll knock you off your shoulders.
There were regular additions to our staff, like the wildlife cameraman who frightened the birds, the artist with an original touch to his brush. There was the famous golfer. The angry waiter. And guess who?
In a greedy age, he was greedy. When everyone else was a snob, so was he. He cheated the customs and excise men. He noted down every penny he spent, like a miser.
Parson Woodford, the famous 18th century diarist, was no problem. He loved food and country life and kept the diaries that bear his name and have become famous throughout the world. We had great fun making that film. Somehow it seemed to come naturally. Perhaps it was in keeping with character.
The following day, he was obliged to take a purge, followed by an emetic. Followed in turn by
holiday activities, like everything else, have changed with the times. There are still a few donkeys on the beach at Cleethorpes, but few people to ride them.
I mean, this beach used to be packed right out. Thousands, weren't there? Yeah. We used to have to wait up on the top and come and say to people, do you mind moving while we get the donkeys down, please, you know, because if they didn't move, they got trod on, didn't they?
No seaside resort would ever be complete without a summer show.
That's it. This is only a rehearsal, you know. It's not the command performance. You know, it's a nice little theatre you've got here, Jack.
You like it, do you?
I like it. It's so comfortable. I didn't know whether to walk on or put it on. Nice little.
Jack and Frida J., the impresarios of the Yarmouth Windmill, watch a rehearsal of one of the real old professionals, Jimmy Wheeler. Do you remember him?
You know, I've got a cottage in the country, and one Sunday a tramp knocked on the door. He said, I've had nothing to eat for 3 days. I said, would you like some cold rice pudding? He said, yes. I said, well, come back tomorrow, it's hot now. Aye, aye, that's your luck.
And here's a man most Norwich people will remember. Seat, as he was known, sold newspapers from his pitch for over 30 years. He was totally blind.
The van with rubber mudguards brings up edition 2 with the latest starting prices and an engine crashed crew. He tells me what's on contents bill, but I don't see so well. In fact, I never get to read the papers that I sell. But I know by feel the coin with which a client pays. In an endless flow of threepences, I measure out my days. In weather hot, in weather cold, in rain, in sleet, in snow. You'll find me here at 2 o'clock until it's time to go. I sometimes sit here thinking of the men behind the news, in Norwich and in London, in France and Santa Cruz, AP, Extel and law courts, Reuter and PA, agencies and lineage men, men in Mandalay, special correspondents in New York and Budapest, men with frantic telephones working on the desk. The work of all these clever chaps, it all ends up, you see, with a fellow selling papers on a corner, just like me.
We also made films of past heroes and heroines like Nurse Edith Cavell. Her friend and companion, Nurse White, remembers those terrible days, especially a frightening experience when they were together in a hospital in Belgium.
These 3 men went into Miss Cavell's office. I thought it was rather funny at that hour, where I just waited and see, and then the door opened very quickly. When then Miss Cavell herself came out, and she opened the door and she came towards me and she said, my dear, these are 2 men from the Battle of Mons. One is badly wounded. Would you take them into your care and look after them? So I took them up to these rooms, and they was next to the theatre, right at the top of the house. And I just kept them there. But what else could you do? You couldn't let 2 men like that go out in the street again.
But Nurse Cavell paid dearly for her kindness, loyalty and patriotism. She was shot by the Germans as a spy. After the war in 1919, her body was brought back to Norfolk, her home, where she was buried with full military honours beside Norwich Cathedral.
I'm a Fenman, bred and born. I was born there in 1901. Father, he thought he'd be up to date. There was the Boer War on. He had me christened Arthur Redvers. Redvers was named after Sir Redvers Buller, a big general in the South African War.
One of the lucky men to survive the Great War was my old chum, the mole catcher, Arthur Randall. Now there's a real fen tiger if ever I saw one.
I got an old trap just set here right where I am now. I can see it before I pull it up. I got something in it. The one thing about these traps that Father used to make, and which I still use, is they didn't damage the skin. In those days, you could get anything up to 2 and 9 or 3 shillings for a best winter clear. And of course, then they deteriorated right down to about 3pence for the one that was black skinned. But they was a good trade, and then they suddenly went, the trade all went, and they're not worth skinning now.
This wire that I make the bees and broom with came from an aeroplane that crashed in this village in 1940. And I've been using it for tying the bees and broom ever since 1944. It's a wonderful piece of wire, and that has tied thousands of brooms.
Sometimes we have only been just in time to film a craft before it disappears. Albert Weimer had been making bees and brooms most of his life at Heavingham, where we filmed him at work. Sadly, he died a few days after completing our film, but his family let us transmit it as a tribute to him.
I've never seen a machine-made one, not a bees and Henry. I've seen different brooms in shops. I was shown one in Norris not long ago. Well, I said I wouldn't put it out on my lawn because there's no wear in that. The broom, with the exception of is now complete. And it's the finest broom still made for sweeping lawns, tennis courts, bowling greens. It's used, I've been told, even at Wimbledon. I'm not answering for the truth of that.
Down in the cornfield you'll find me. In the summertime happy I'll be. Sticking my hand.
And, of course, the singing postman.
Following the boys around. Down in the cornfield you'll find me. In the summertime happy I'll be. Sticking my hand.
We spent one summer filming the history of harvesting corn. The old-fashioned way with scythes, flails, binders, all working again with Jimmy Knights, who had been through it many times before. He's still going strong at 98.
That was that hot summer. Very hot summer. The old hens was going about dragging the wings on the ground. Yeah. The old ducks come out of the pond, they'd have them soon back in again because that was so hot.
Down in the cornfield you'll find me. In the summertime happy I'll be. Sticking my hand in the pot of cold tea. Following the boys around.
I'm no domestic woman. No, but when I come down, when I hear that music going, one of the greatest, I'm a female category, you know.
Yes, I must have been a beautiful baby. I must have been a wonderful child.
Back in town, Norwich's best-known and much-loved character, Black Anna, who ran the Jolly Butcher's pub in Burr Street, loved to sing in the bar.
When it came to win blue ribbons, you better show the other kids how. I can see the judge's eye when he handed me the prize. Better made the killer's bar. Oh, I must have been a beautiful baby, my baby. I said, baby, yeah, I'm a baby. Don't pretend
After Mrs. Runnicles had shown us her Suffolk rusks, Hundreds of letters arrived demanding the recipe.
Now I'd like to tell you how to make saffron rasks. We used 9 ounces of flour, 3 ounces of fat, a pinch of salt, and 2 eggs. Mix it with milk, mix it to a nice soft dough, then roll it out. Put these onto a tin and bake them, not too crowded. Then we take them out, split them, put them back and dry them slowly. So they're nice and crisp when they come out. Those rasks should be done now. Are they ready?
I think so.
Oh, take them out now.
How you gonna keep her down on the farm after you've seen Barraud? That's where I met Hansel and Hansel in the sand. She said, what ho, I just let her go. How you gonna keep her away from home? That's a mystery. That's where I met. She said to me, don't be let me give her down the hole, but how you gonna keep her down on the farm? After you've seen Barraud.
My sister next to me, she's 74, and she arrived home. She had been over to America for 6 months, and she arrived home. I don't know what starts your Friday, I am sure.
You haven't seen her yet?
No.
But she is coming to see you?
Norwich.
Oh.
She come home to Norwich, that's where she lives.
Well, jolly good luck to you, Ted. I hope you have many more years.
I'll tell you something else. You won't put that in. Because I had a man come down to see me at my wedding anniversary. And of course there was a piece in there and fighting times you'll see it my photo.
Yeah?
Did you?
Yes.
Oh. Well, I told him a bit to put in there. I said, bear in mind, I said I'd 6 children, and I was teaming then, only an ordinary teaming. I got 15 children a week, and I'd 6 children to keep, besides me and my wife. I said, and I didn't go down to the post office to get family allowance. He said, I mustn't put that in. Why not?
Oh, well, that's very interesting. Cut that, Ted. Yes.
There you are. You have to put the bagger in.
Well, as you see, sometimes the tables get turned even on us. But at least we dare print the film after all these years. Unhappily, a lot of the people that we filmed have passed on and places have changed. But at least we've got a record of how things were in our day, so that future generations can take them off these shelves and make what they like of them.
Talking about bygones, are you one of these pair people who keep living in the past? If so, you're just like me. I'm always doing it. And then one night, something happened. I had a bundle of photographs in my bottom drawer. Oft-times I would bring them out once more. And I was a-sitting down all alone, deep in memory. And all at once I had a voice so softly called to me. Oh, you can't keep living in the past, although it was so grand. They were jolly in lots of ways, but you can't keep living in your old school days. They was such wonderful times back in days of yore, but they've gone, 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 gone. They've gone forevermore. But you know, it don't matter what they say, I still keep living in the past. Cheerio.